Hey everyone, welcome to this special episode of DevTalk with Brian Parks. I'm Brian Parks, and since everybody's doing kind of their top 10 tips or top 5 tips or how I work remotely or those sorts of things, all centered around working remotely and good ways to uh, work effectively when you're remote, especially for uh, a whole slew of people who maybe aren't used to working remote and now have to work remote because of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic that's forcing a lot of companies to shut down offices or asking people to work remote or not work in co-working spaces, those sorts of things. I thought I'd share my uh, it started out just my thoughts, but there are 10 of them, so we'll call it top 10 tips that I think are good that help me work remotely. So, a little bit of background on me. I've worked remotely on and off for the past 5 years or so, and I, I do, I do think remote work is kind of the hot new thing right now. A few years ago, it was open workspaces, open floor plans. All the articles were open floor plans are all the rage. You need to switch to an open floor plan. And then a whole bunch of articles saying open floor plans are bad and here's why. Now everything's about remote working. I'm not going to say that remote working is the silver bullet that is going to make everything better, but it works for me. I like it. I think there are good ways to do remote work. I think there are less effective ways to do remote work. There are good things to, there are good aspects to having a physical office space and getting people involved that way. And there are definitely some upsides to being remote and having remote work opportunities. So with that, let's dive into some things that I think have helped me, especially in working remote. And before I get into my 10 best practices, I do want to mention one thing that's not on this list is instant messaging tools. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with instant messaging tools like Slack. I do think they have their place, but I don't think they're super critical to having successful remote work situation. And in some cases, I think they might even be more of a distraction. So I'm not going to talk about Slack. Maybe in a future video, I'll talk specifically about Slack, Teams, Skype, even though Skype for Business is going away. But those sorts of things, I might have another video about how to effectively use those tools, or how I find it most effective to use those tools, and maybe some of the downsides of using those tools. So let's talk remote work. First thing right off the bat is it does make it difficult to kind of accidentally be remote, especially if you're used to, or your company is used to having everybody in the office and one or two people are remote, or half a team's in the office, half a team is remote. You can start to feel like two separate teams or a small team plus some satellite people. And if you don't think intentionally about how you're including the remote people, it can really quickly turn into that situation where you have a small team that's co-located and some other people. And we don't want that. We want everybody to feel involved, everybody to feel engaged. So here are my top 10 tips on how I successfully work remotely. So the first one, if you're going to work remote, definitely have a separate workspace from your life space. So you probably haven't seen it on this channel, but at some point in time I'll do a little tour of my home office here. It is a separate room from the rest of my house. Sure, I'll pull my laptop out and go somewhere else in the house, maybe for a call, maybe to work on a side project or something like that. But when it's work time, I come into my office. I have a really nice setup that I like. It's fairly ergonomic. It's probably not the best in the world, but it's my workspace. And when I'm sitting there, I'm doing work. And it kind of helps put me in the right mindset to recognize that this is work time, not lifetime, not fun time. Not that work can't be fun, but it's a kind of a I go to work. Even though I work from home, I still have a commute. It might only be 10 feet, but I do go to my office. I do go to work. Second thing, kind of ties into that, is have a routine. So it's really easy to wake up whenever, go to work whenever, stop working whenever, but having too much fluidity makes it really easy to fall into the trap of not really putting yourself into work mode. So one of the nice things about having that physical separation is that at a very specific time, or within half an hour, depending on the day, and of course doctor's appointments and that sort of thing might change that. But for the most part, at about the same time every day, I go from the rest of the house, have some breakfast, whatever, and I come to my office. I work in my office, I leave my office for lunch, come back to my office for the afternoon, and then at the end of the day, that's when I leave the office, and again, maybe I'll take my laptop. I won't work on work stuff outside of the office, but I might take my laptop, and I'll go into the rest of the house, make dinner, have my normal evening routine, but I have a set routine. It's not just haphazard. It's a very specific, at this time I go to work and now I am in work mode. For me, that's really important. Number 3 is put on pants. For me, this has never been an issue, but it's one that in talking with a lot of people who have worked remote or are now starting to work remote and kind of have to put themselves through specific discipline to ensure that they don't have that too much fluidity between work mode and life mode, not work mode, is they make a distinction between work pants and everything else pants. So when they're not working, they might wear sweatpants, but when they're working, they don't wear sweatpants. They wear jeans, slacks, something that isn't sweatpants, something that helps put them in the mindset of, this is not lounging time, this is work time. I feel professional, I'm dressed professionally. For me, I wear exactly the same thing that I would wear if I went into the office. We have a very casual dress code, so this is actually a company sweatshirt. I wear a t-shirt, jeans. I do wear shoes when I go into the office. I don't wear shoes in my house because we're a kind of a shoes-off house. But I do have slippers that I wear in the house. So it's a little bit different than just wearing, maybe not even having socks on. And that's another thing that I've heard. For some people it's pants, for some people it's shoes. When they put shoes on, that puts them in the mindset of, now it's time to do things during the day. And in the case of work, it's time to go to work. Number 4 is invest in a good video conferencing solution. So my preference is Zoom. I haven't used Zoom for all those 5 years, but I've used it recently, and I really like Zoom. I think it works really well for video conferencing, and it works really well for having multiple people all sharing their video at the same time. It's a really stable platform for the most part. I've also used Slack for that more recently. It's not quite as stable, though it does allow for the video conferencing aspect, and if you're already using Slack, that might make sense. I've used Teams. I don't use Teams regularly, but I have been on Teams calls with other companies where their main communication platform is Microsoft Teams. That works pretty well. I'm actually pretty impressed with that. Not impressed enough that personally I'm going to switch off of Zoom yet. Maybe Teams will surprise me in the next year or so, but I think it's a pretty good platform. Skype is not one that I would recommend, not just because it's going away, but it was great for screen sharing, but if you start having multiple people all sharing their video at the same time, its stability tended to be kind of iffy. So Zoom is awesome, Teams is pretty awesome, Slack and Skype maybe not so much, but definitely invest in a good video conferencing solution, and don't cheap out on your webcam. Get a high quality webcam, and when you're on a video conference, have everybody use their webcam. There's a lot of nonverbal communication that goes on, especially in the face. The show Lie to Me is a pretty cool TV show, but the science that it's backed by is legitimate. We do notice small micro expressions, some people more than others, but we do have visible facial expressions when we're talking. And sometimes if people are talking and you want to indicate agreement, if you're not using video, you'd have to unmute and say something. But using video, you can just nod in agreement or give a thumbs up or something like that, and people can see it. And that's what we do if we were in person as well. And I think those sorts of things, video conferencing technologies are just going to keep improving. So definitely video conferencing is one of the ones that I would say, it's number 4 on my list after put yourself in the right mindset, basically. So number 5, this is not just for remote working, but good for just general productivity. I think it becomes more of an important thing with remote working is manage your communication tools. So we all probably use a video conferencing solution, email, maybe something like Slack. Maybe you're still using Skype, you haven't quite transitioned off of it, but you have many different ways that communications are coming in. Maybe you use your phone, text messages, phone calls, that sort of thing. I don't think of those things because I don't use my phone for my day job. Everything's through Zoom, an Outlook meeting, that sort of thing. So if you have all of these ways that communications are coming in, it's very easy to get distracted, and especially when you're working remote and that's kind of your only way of getting information in. So there's no one-size-fits-all strategy for this. Every person is going to work slightly differently, but it might be something as simple as checking your email once in the morning, once before lunch, maybe once after lunch, and once before you sign off for the day. Or maybe you always have email up, but Slack is kind of minimized and on the back burner for a while. Maybe it's the reverse. Email is, you hardly ever check it, but Slack is always front and center in case people need to ask you questions. It really depends on how you work as a person and how the rest of the people in your company or on your team work as well. So if you tend to be a Slack-based team, Slack might be front and center a lot more often than Zoom or Teams or Outlook might be. So number 6 is basically if you're not real strong with written communication, definitely that's an area to improve. Working remotely, sure, you can schedule a meeting, but that's very synchronous. It needs everybody to be on the call at the same time, but not everybody is necessarily going to be able to be on the call at the same time, and it's not as easy to. It's kind of jarring if you're not already in that mode of, hey, let's schedule a meeting for this thing. So it's the kind of the equivalent to someone stopping by someone else's desk is sending them an email or sending them a Slack message or something like that. And it does mean that you need to be clear, concise in your written language. And that's something that I've definitely had to work on over the past several years. I was good at written like essays and stuff like that, but written interpersonal communication came a little bit more challenging to me. So that's something that, especially with engineers, I think is really important to nail down, but might not be something that you just accidentally are good at. But where that really comes into play is things like documentation, how to set up your environment, how to accomplish some workflow. Or in the engineering world, comments on Jira issues, communicating about what the requirements are, or how to test something or something like that. Kind of that out-of-band asynchronous communication to make sure that everybody can do what they need to do when they're ready to do it, and have it be really fluid. Another thing is have really good documentation, so product documentation, internal product documentation, process documentation, that sort of thing. That's really easily consumable, really easy to find. That way you don't always have to schedule a meeting for everything or call someone up, get someone to walk you through it, have a screen share for every little thing. Some people might get bugged by it, but even if they don't, it's a lot more, it feels a lot more heavy to set up a screen share for every little thing than if they just sat next to you and you could say, hey, can you look at my screen for a minute? It just takes more time and energy and is a little bit more jarring. So written communication, definitely something I recommend. Number 7 is have processes that facilitate without restricting. So what I mean by this is you don't want to define your processes so much to every minute detail that people feel like they're strangled by the process or drowning in the process, or feel like they can't remember what the process is and are always making mistakes. That's bad. You don't want that level of process. What you do want is enough process that people don't have to ask what's expected or how to do something. So something like, how do I clone this repository? Or how do I build the code? Make sure there's a process for that. Make sure there's a clear documentation. It's relatively straightforward. Not a lot of memorization is involved. Let's say another example might be how to write up a bug. Maybe put templates in place so that it's really easy to write up a bug, and people don't have to ask every single time they're writing up a bug until they get the hang of it. This also helps for things like onboarding. Onboarding is notoriously difficult with remote workers because there is so much that they don't know. They can't know. They're completely new to the company. If you have those resources in place and the processes are fairly standardized or fairly straightforward, it makes that onboarding process so much easier for everybody involved. And not to mention they can be more productive right out of the gate. That's an added bonus. Number 8 on my list is talk to people. So this doesn't just mean like when you have a question, ask, but this also means if you have Slack, have kind of more social oriented channels. So something around pets or going outside or music. I play guitar and bass. It might be cool to communicate with other people, hey, what songs are you learning? Or, what music have you heard that really inspired you to play the guitar lately? Those sorts of things. That's kind of a way to, get to know other people, humanize them more, and also kind of break up the day so it's not just all work and no play, without getting distracted by everything around your house. Which brings us to the next one, which is avoid distractions. So if you work from home, it's really easy to get distracted with dirty dishes or laundry that needs to be done or those sorts of things. One way to mitigate that, definitely having a space that is specifically your office definitely makes that a lot easier, because hopefully you're not slinging your dirty laundry all over your office, and hopefully no dirty dishes in your office. But there's still the times when you get up and walk around, go have lunch, that sort of thing. And make sure that you don't get distracted by all those other things and don't get back to work after lunch. If you need to, make a to-do list. Or, if you want to follow a strategy like the getting things done strategy and have a list where you can put, I know that I need to do the dishes, let me put that on a list for later so I don't forget about it. That might be a good way, depending on how you work. But the key point is make sure that you can keep your mind on work when you need to keep your mind on work, and all those other things that might be distracting, kind of parcel them off, partition them away to be done in their own time, in their specific time. And finally, get up and walk around periodically. It's not good to always be sitting in a chair. It's not good to always be cooped up in the same room the entire day. So periodically, maybe every hour, maybe every hour and a half, maybe every 2 hours, get up, walk around, maybe go outside, walk to the mailbox, get your mail, that sort of thing. Just kind of break up the day, give your brain a chance to wander and kind of recover from periods of focus, and just make sure you keep your body moving and the blood flowing. You'll end up being more productive, and you'll feel better about your work environment because you can control all aspects of it. So those are my 10 tips for success and how I feel better able to work from home and how I've been able to work from home. At this point, it's been pretty much continuously for the past year and a half, but like I said, on and off for the past 5 years. Those are the tips that I subscribe to and I think are really helpful. Granted, there is some wiggle room in there, so if one of them doesn't necessarily work for exactly as I described it for you, go ahead and play around with it. Ultimately, this is your work environment, so make sure that it works for you, but at the same time, you're able to separate work from everything else and have a good work-life balance, or as some people say, leave work at work, and don't bring it home with you, and have that good separation. So hopefully this was useful and informative. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. I go live every Monday at 6:30 Mountain Time, talking about various different topics, showing some demos of some things that I'm working on, talking about topics like this. Honestly, this one was kind of an exception because I wanted to get it out before next Monday. Yeah, next Monday I'll be live again. Subscribe to the channel if you like this and want to hear more about it. And check out my website, brianparks.me. I have a blog there. I have links to some other stuff that I've done, and some more good information. Thanks for watching.